So here we're going to be looking at the private and external costs of pollution, and this is from chapter 13 in my microeconomics textbook, and I'm Richard Friberg. Okay, so we're kind of looking at the production of a good that is associated with negative externalities, the production of that good. We documented before, we looked at the case, we said, think of a case like paper, and saying that there are some costs associated with the production that are not internalized if by producers. Okay, if they're not given motivations or incentives to do so. So too much is produced, and that's associated with deadweight loss. So how can we work with policy to address that issue? Well, the first thing to note is that it's typically not the problem that too much paper, if we're taking an example of paper that's produced, the problem is that there's too much negative externalities that are produced that are associated with the production here. So too much pollution. Okay, so we want to typically target policy to the root of the problem. We want to target the pollution rather than production of paper per se. So if someone comes up with a way of producing paper that has no negative externalities, that's good news. So how can we use policy to target that? Well, let's look at the following type of diagram where we have a quantity here, and quantity not now of the good, but of pollution per se, okay? And we have money here, the costs or the price, and the vertical axis, okay? So we want to look at the total cost to society of pollution, or alternatively of limiting pollution. So we could think of the marginal external costs that we had before. Say that there's something like this. Marginal external cost of pollution. So typically start out low. There's pollutants, poisonous stuff that's emitted into nature, hurting nature and people, other businesses. At low concentrations, typically small problem. The larger the concentration, the greater the marginal cost to society. So something like that. And of course, the steepness of this will reflect how large of a problem this is. So that's one part of the cost to society. Another part of the cost to society that's less obvious in some sense is the cost of limiting pollution. Okay? So we can think of firms that are producing, they have some costs of limiting pollution. So, putting on the scrubbers on the chimneys, putting in various cleaning apparatus, etc., etc. So if they're not using that at all, they would be producing this much pollution. The more that they're limiting pollution, the higher the cost of limiting, further limiting pollution. So we call this, the private cost of limiting pollution, or the marginal abatement cost. So abatement and limiting. Okay, so the social optimum, if we take it as given that society wants to minimize the sum of these two costs, so it wants to, by setting a pollution level such that minimizes the sum of the private cost of limiting pollution and the external cost, what is the optimal solution? Well, it's where the marginal benefit equals the marginal cost, okay? So, and as we say in the text, we could weigh these differently, but, this is a sort of standard kind of argument made in economics. We also note that if this is unregulated, so the private solution would be to emit this much, Okay, so if the externality is not internalized anyway, firms have no incentive to, or very limited incentives to limit production or limit pollution. So they're going to be polluting this much. Okay, if they are to limit pollution, they take invest in this. So for all of this, the cost of limiting pollution is lower than the benefit of lowering pollution, the marginal external cost, and that holds true up until this point. Okay. So how would we reach this point? Well, we can reach it essentially two types of ways. Or, we could think of a quantity regulation where some way we're saying that this much can be produced. We call that Q opt. Or we could have a price regulation where we're saying that this price of polluting is what we're deciding for. Okay,